Hey guys, welcome back. We're at video number 6 in our series. So at this point we've got our domain controller created and we're back at the logon screen after the reboot. Hopefully nobody got any errors. If you did, please put them down in the comments. If there's something I could do to help you or point you in the right direction, I'll gladly do it. So at this point let's hit Control-Alt-Delete. Let's get in here. We'll see our NetBIOS name / our username. So let's log in. And if you don't know, that should be the password that you created before you joined the system and created the domain controller. All right, so now that we have the system up, let's go back into Server Manager. Again, you're going to either hit Start and go to Server Manager or click Server Manager. So we're going to wait for that bar to finish loading. Apologize for any background noise in this video. There's a lot of systems in here humming, so if you can hear them, I apologize for that. That's just kind of goes with the game with the IT world, so it's just common. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to ADDS again. We're going to check it. We're going to go back up here. We're going to do our completion of our DHCP configuration. But we're not going to do that yet. What we're going to do first is we're going to go to DNS. Check that. All right, we're still getting errors and warnings. That's okay. It's to be expected. It's Windows. Welcome to the Windows world. We're going to click on Start. We're going to go to Administrative Tools, and we're going to go to DNS. So we're actually going to right-click on this and then pin to Start. We're going to right-click on Group Policy Management, pin that to Start. We're going to scroll back up. We're going to go find Active Directory, Users and Computers, and pin that to Start. And we're going to go to DHCP and pin that to Start. All right, so what we're going to do is the first thing we're going to do is we're going to Active Directory, Users and Computers. Expand your domain controller, your actual directory structure here. And as you can see, it's installed, so that's good news. You're going to want to click on each one of these things. You're going to have default stuff in here. That's okay. You're going to have all your default configurations and users. This is all good. So if you click on these things and you get error messages, that's generally not a good sign. You don't want to start off with something broken. Again, if you get error messages, the best thing I could suggest you do is just per the actual word by word as to what the error message is. You could usually find that in the event viewer. Post that inside the chat, and I'll be able to get back to you and tell you what's going on. If you have to redo it, that sucks, but unfortunately you don't want to start out with a system that's broken and provide that system that's broken as your base for all your other infrastructure to connect to. That's not a good idea. So if there's error messages, please post them in the chat, and I'll do my best to help you. I'm going to actually right-click on this thing. I'm going to choose to pin it to the taskbar, and I'm going to close it out. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Start. I'm going to go to DNS. I'm going to check to see if my DNS configuration is working correctly. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at the forward lookup zones and check the ytd.local. And here we could see that we have our same as parent. We have our DC name right here. So this is working correctly. Despite those error messages, it is working correctly. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a reverse lookup zone. Now, this is not mandatory. It is optional. But from an IT perspective, it does make your life a lot easier. So a reverse lookup zone is when you do like an NS lookup for a specific IP address. So for instance, if we open up a command prompt here, we can actually show you. If I do NS lookup, YTD local, we're going to see the ytd.local is our IP address of 192.168.242.242. So now if we do an NS lookup for the IP address, we're going to get a timeout. And the reason why is because when you do it this way, this is the reverse lookup. You're not looking up the name to the number. You're looking up the number to the name. That's the reverse. So the reason why you get those error messages is because you don't have a reverse lookup zone. So let's create one. So we'll do New Zone. Click on Next. We're going to create a primary zone. We're going to do the zone Active Directory available. We're going to say to all DNS servers running domain controllers in this domain. You could do to all servers running domain controllers in the forest if there's multiple servers or you have multiple forest child domains in the same forest. But generally speaking, I'm just going to choose the standard IPv4 reverse lookup. And in here, you would think you'd put it in the reverse. You don't. It's just 192.168.242 for my domain. It can be whatever yours is, but it's not the reverse. It will automatically add it as the reverse down here. And if you click this checkbox and you want to add it in there yourself, you could. But just it's going to be your first 3 octets of your IP scope, or subnet. So we're going to click next. It's going to say only secure dynamic updates recommended for Active Directory, or you could choose both secure and non-secure. Now, you want to choose both secure and not secure if you're not running just Active Directory DNS lookups. So if you're running, say, OpenDNS, you're going to want to choose secure and not secure because your OpenDNS servers can't authenticate to your domain controllers. If that's not checked, this doesn't work right, which could cause issues, conflicts, duplication. Websites may not load correctly. You could end up with a slew of different issues. For the sake of this, I'm going to do secure because I want my DNS secure and I don't use junk on my internal infrastructure. And a lot of people may give me slack about saying, OpenDNS is great, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's great if you're internal and you can internally maintain it. If you're an MSP and you use it, it's terrible because you have to maintain it and then you have multiple clients that'll be running it. And chances are there's no way to actually maintain it correctly. I've seen it break more times than I could count and cause more issues for people trying to get to websites and cost companies, like client-based companies, tons of money to troubleshoot something that was caused by the MSP. So for the sake of DNS, I would tell you, run the DNS off your domain controllers. And if you're worried about your guest wireless network having access to your internal DNS, that's a valid complaint or a valid concern. Create proxy-based DNS on your firewall. Set up forwarders in your firewall and then use your IPS filters or your traffic filters through your firewall to filter the DNS lookups through the firewall to the servers. And if you do it that way, then you don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. You don't have to run OpenDNS. You'll still have the security. You'll still have the ability in a fly, if you need to change your forward lookup zone to look out somewhere else. It's just a better idea or a better method to do than using the other way with OpenDNS. OpenDNS will work great for you, no question, 100% works great on an internal infrastructure, but managed service providers, if you have OpenDNS running on multiple clients, you're really just asking for trouble. So we're going to click next, and we're going to click finish. So now we have a reverse lookup zone. So we have our reverse set, but that doesn't mean that we're 100% configured, because if we go down here and we do ipconfig flush DNS, and we do the DNS lookup for the 242.242, we're still going to get the error message. And the reason why we still get the error message is because we created this after we added the domain controller. So what we're going to want to do is we could go over to the forward lookup zone, and we could find our configuration here and click on properties. And then we could click the update associated pointer or PTR record, which is the same for your reverse lookup zone, and click OK. And what this will do is now, if we refresh this, we'll see the 242.242 in here. And then at that point, if we do flush DNS and do the NS lookup, this will now come back and show us that the reverse lookup is for the domain controller we created. So that's how you create a reverse lookup zone in your configuration, which again, it's not mandatory, but it does make troubleshooting issues a lot easier for you in the future. So speaking of DNS, now that we got this configured here for our DNS and our lookup zones, what we're going to want to do with DNS itself is go to properties. We're going to go to name servers, make sure our domain controller actually has the correct IP address in here. We don't want to use WINS. WINS will be helpful if you're running like your 2008 forest level and domain level. You can run WINS. WINS was helpful for things that didn't really communicate with DNS, like Apple Talk or really old Linux-based systems. If you're running like Ubuntu and the Ubuntu platform you're running is from like the past 10 years, you don't need WINS. But if it's like, AIX or HPUX or something like that from like the 80s, early 90s, you're going to need to configure a Win server. That's a horse of a different color. I'm not going to do that for this video, but that's something you'll need to do. So zone transfers, we don't have any, so there's no reason to set any of that stuff up. We're going to go back up here. We're going to actually go to properties of the DNS server itself. We're going to listen on both IPv6 and IPv4. Do not change that. If you change that, you'll break your Windows 10 and 11 clients. They need IPv6 in order to work correctly. You don't need to configure it. It could be set to dynamic. It makes no difference. But Windows clients need IPv6 to function correctly. So don't change that. If you're running more than one NIC on your domain controller, don't do that. You're not allowed to do multi-homed anymore on domain controllers. That's not supported by Microsoft. You'll have to create DNS configurations in your NIC to not allow both NICs to register for DNS. If you don't, you're going to cause conflicts or loops where you're going to bridge a connection where a client may connect on one IP and then get a secondary IP address may connect back, which will cause issues on the client side. It'll cause latency on your internet. It'll cause problems in your authentication. Don't do that. Just run a single NIC. If you're worried, oh my God, what happens if the NIC breaks or the NIC dies? Then have two domain controllers on two different physical pieces of hardware. That will solve that issue. But do not run two NICs on one box. Not a good idea. That hasn't been supported since SBS, and SBS is long dead. Forwarders and root hints. Root hints are going to be usually provided by your Windows updates. Your Windows updates should provide your root hints. Keep that stuff fresh. Root hints are the forward, like your internet zone. So looking up like google.com, that's your root hints. If you want to use forwarders instead, you can create forwarders and then set it to use root hints if none are available. For instance, if you wanted to say, I don't want to use the stuff Microsoft provides, but I want to use like Google's DNS for lookups, you could choose that. This isn't going to resolve. The reason why is because I am not currently connected to the internet with the system, but you could add that, just hit OK, hit apply, and now when you went to the your server, like for instance now on your client machine, if you went to www.google.com, your client machine would connect to your domain controller's DNS server, and the DNS server would forward that information to Google's DNS server for whatisgoogle.com and provide the lookup back. That's where you set that. You don't set it in the NIC. You don't set it on the client machine. You don't set it inside of some custom A record. I've seen things that I still don't understand what the tech or the engineers were thinking when they did it, but if you do it anywhere other than here, you're going to cause something to break. Windows is not designed to have that work that way. It works basically like a token ring almost, where you're connecting from one address to another address to another address to the internet, and then from the internet to that last hop back desktop. Because if you don't follow that process and you put that 8.8.8 on the client machine will always choose the fastest DNS lookup. So it knows the fastest DNS lookup is Google, because Google has data centers that are way, way, way higher funded than your server you're building. And as a result, your desktop will never authenticate to your domain controller. It'll never get group policy, and your file services will break. Looking up things with the host names will not work correctly. They may work one day and then not the next. That's all caused by misconfigurations with DNS. So for the sake of DNS, use the forwarder, and that's it. Click OK, and that's it. So now you have your server configured, your DNS structure is configured, everything should work right in your DNS. So let's configure our DHCP. Before I do anything, I'm actually going to pin this, and I'm going to close this out. So now let's move to DHCP. You could do it two ways. You can go to your server manager and you can configure it. And frankly, if you do it that way, it's probably better, because server manager, again, full of bugs. If you click on this and you don't do it through here, but you do it through the DHCP itself, this will never go away. It'll always tell you that there's more that needs to be configured, even though there's not. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to configure the DHCP. We're going to click on Next. The credentials we're going to use for the configuration, at least for our ADDS server, is going to be our netbios /administrator, and we're going to hit commit, and then we're going to hit close. All right, so now that completes our DHCP configuration. Close this. Bueller. There we go. Now we're going to go over to DHCP. So in our DHCP configuration, this is where we're going to set some stuff up for our client machines to make sure everything works correctly on our clients. If we go over to IPv4, again, don't disable IPv6. You don't have to configure it, but don't disable it. We're going to IPv4, and we're going to do new scope. And we're going to click on next. And we're going to name the scope like LAN for a local area network. You can call it whatever you want. Call it Frank, Bob, Murphy. It doesn't make any difference. Click next. So this is where we're going to set up our IP address. Now, our server is 192.168.242.242. But that doesn't mean that we have to be on the same subnet with our DHCP configuration. If you have a firewall configured, you could actually create forwarders in your firewall for DHCP lookup. So you could set a completely different VLAN. Say, like, for instance, maybe this is VLAN 10 for the servers, and then you have VLAN 15 for your desktops. You could create that and then say use 192.168.5 dot something or 192.168.0.0 and then do /16 so you have all those addresses. You can configure it any way you want. It doesn't make any difference. But for the sake of this, because we're on one domain, we don't have a firewall configured for this, and we're going to do one subnet. We're going to just make it the starting address. We're going to do 192.168.242.50, and then the address at the end, we're going to do 192.168.242. I don't know, 100. We're going to do a /24. So it's 255.255.255.0. That means that we have 252 addresses. If you're going to need more than that, then you can do a /16, or you could really you could use the full subnet if you really wanted to. Not necessary here for the sake of this. Next, we're going to click. Sorry, so we're going to click next, which brings us to this add exclusions and delays. For this, these are exclusions. Like, for instance, if I made it the full scope of the full set of addresses, but I knew like 240 through 242 were my domain controller, my file server, maybe a print server, whatever you wanted to create, we could actually set those in here to exclude those address ranges. That's helpful if you have printers that you're going to set for static IPs or other servers on static IPs that are in the same DHCP zone or subnet, and you don't have any exclusions for those addresses. I don't do that because, generally speaking, I use something called DHCP reservations for those systems. And the reason why is because it helps me see whether or not they're online. And I also don't have to keep a list of all these static IP addresses anymore. And then from a migration standpoint, it makes my life a lot easier because when I need to migrate to a new DHCP server, I can just take a backup, copy the backup, put it on the new DHCP, and roll it out, which saves money on the front end when you have to do a migration from one old system to a new system. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we don't need any exclusions, and then we're going to set a delay in milliseconds. Usually I do 5 milliseconds, and I click next. This is the amount of time for the scope of leases when distributed by the server. So in other words, if this is going to be your wireless network for your LAN and you know that there's going to be a ton of phones in and out and in and out, I would honestly set this to maybe like 6 hours, 0 minutes, no days. That way, so when those phones leave, it clears the address enough so that way you don't have a full scope, because if you have hundreds of phones and you only have hundreds of IP addresses, you're going to run out of IPs. So if you know, hey, these addresses are going to be constantly fluctuating through the day with people coming in and leaving, then make it, 3 hours. Generally, I make it 6 hours so that way most of the day the phone is on the same address, and if there's an issue where somebody's phone is infected, I could provide them with details of what they have going on their phone. Whereas if it flips addresses and I don't have an advanced audit report or some kind of network audit turned on, then you would never know. So, keep in mind there's a reason why you do things for a little longer versus a little shorter. But if you don't care and you're in a situation where this is going to provide addresses, you have it VLAN, it's for a guest network, you're in, say, like an oil change place where it's literally every 5 minutes somebody else is in there, change it. Just make it 3 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, 45 minutes, doesn't make any difference. For this one, I'm actually going to set it for 3 days. I'm going to click on next. And then it's going to ask me if I want to create configuration options for the scope. I'm actually going to click on next, and yes, I do. So now this is the IP address for the router. So what is the router IP address? That's going to be your gateway. So for this, it's going to be 192.168.242.1. And we're going to click add. And then we're going to change we're going to go next, and then we're going to go DNS. So the parent domain is ytd.local. That is the server address. There's no reason to change or do anything here, so we're going to click on next. Then we're going to go in here. This is going to ask us about wins. We don't run wins, so we just click next. And then we're going to ask if we want to activate the scope now. We're going to choose no. I will activate the scope later, and I'll show you why in a second here. So we're going to click on next and then click on finish. So now we have the scope, right? So here's our scope options. This is our DNS server. This is our router. This is ytd.local for the actual domain. And we have our IP address. So in here, now we have reservations. So if this is where I would go in here and I would choose a new reservation and then choose an IP address. So if I knew like 51 was going to be something specific, I would put like, I don't know, print server. I'd put the MAC address in here. I'd put a description in here and I'd hit add. And what that would give me the ability to do is once the system is added back onto the network, once the system authenticates, once this has an internet connection on the DHCP, it will automatically get that IP address. So you could do that on desktops, on laptops, anything that you need to like remote desktop into, but you don't want to set the static on the system because if they go to a hotel and they plug in a cable, they're not going to be able to get out to the internet. Use a reservation. Reservations are perfect for that. Same thing with printers. Use reservations for your printers. Because if you use a reservation for your printer and somebody replaces a printer, you could put the same IP address on it, but you don't have to physically be in front of it. You just add the MAC address. As soon as they plug that printer in, it's live and it's on that IP address. So that's what you want to do usually for reservations. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go into scope and we're going to choose property. And in the properties here, we're going to add a description. We're going to call this local area network. Now we're going to go into DNS. Now this is important. This is all basically your base configuration. Honestly, you could disable the dynamic updates for DNS PTR records if you don't have a reverse lookup zone. So if you chose in the last video not to create your reverse lookup zone, then click this. That's totally fine. If, however, you have the reverse lookup zone set up, let's go to configure and we're going to enable name protection and click OK. So what that's going to do is that's going to force your network to not allow duplicate names. So if somebody has two machines and they decide to turn an old machine back on, but it was named the same as the new machine, it's not going to issue a duplicate IP address or a duplicate name with a different IP address on the infrastructure. So it doesn't cause issues or errors in your DNS. The next thing you're going to want to do is click on advanced. This is the delay configuration. This is where we set the 5 milliseconds before, but I didn't give you details on it. What this does is this delays how long before the system will issue an IP address to a system plugged in. This is used for two different purposes. The first purpose is when you connect this, if you delay the configuration, it gives the system enough time to check to see if that host name exists elsewhere. And if it does, it will not give that address. The second thing it does is if you have your configuration set for wake on LAN or wait for LAN before the actual authentication to take place, it allows the system enough time to provide the address, and it works in conjunction with your group policy configuration for the handshake to take place before the actual system can authenticate. So while it does lower the speed in which the person can authenticate onto the infrastructure, it creates a buffer that basically helps protect your infrastructure configuration from duplicate names, or even from, in a lot of senses, from ransomware attacks where people are using cloning of MAC addresses and configurations of that nature. Because the system is smart enough to know, you have a cloned MAC address, the same host name, this looks like a duplicate, I'm not going to give you an address. And if you have your auditing set up correctly, this will actually audit you, tell you in a log specifically what happened on that day with that person for you to track down the issue. So at this point, we're just going to click OK. And once you hit OK, you'd be able to right-click on this thing and you'd be able to activate it. And once you have it activated, any machine on your network will get an address from this system. Don't activate a DHCP configuration if you have DHCP elsewhere on your infrastructure. For this configuration, because again, I'm not using a firewall, I'm using a flat network, and really I have things all over the place, I'm not going to issue DHCP because I don't want things from other networks getting a DHCP address on this. That's not the correct way to configure it, but without the equipment set up here, without the lab set up here to support these YouTube videos, this is what I have to offer, so this is what we go with. If you're doing this in a lab and you don't want to give DHCP out to everybody and you're on the same subnet, do not activate the DHCP. Again, this is a fundamental video to show you how to do this properly, not necessarily do this in the test network I have set up this way. So at any rate, this was video 6. Hopefully this was helpful. I'm going to kick off the next video probably with group policy and those configurations. So like and subscribe. If you have any errors, any issues, any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. Anything that I can help you out with, please let me know. I do freelance as well, so if there's something that I could do for you guys, if this is a business watching this stuff that just needs help, feel free to reach out. Again, like and subscribe. I'll add the information into the details for any of the information that I have, and anything that I could give you guys will be posted there. Again, hopefully you have a nice day, and thanks for watching.